Hi, this is Mr. Schneider. This is podcast. This is podcast 5.1. This is JJ. Say hi, JJ.
Hi.
So today we're going to talk about federalism. Have you ever heard the word federalism? Do you know what it is?
What? What are we doing?
Well, maybe I'll go ahead and explain it to you. Okay?
Are we on TV?
We are on TV.
No, we are.
Yeah, we are.
Well,
Yes. All right. Federalism is shared. It's power shared between the three levels of government.
I don't do it.
Okay, but we're going to look at federal and state government. And this is set up by Article 6 of the Constitution.
Daddy, look.
In this video, we will discuss federalism. Federalism is about government power. Federalism means that power is divided between a national government and state or provincial governments. In the United States, some powers belong to the national government in Washington, D.C., and other powers belong to the state governments, such as the state government in New York. We call the national government in Washington, D.C. the federal government. In addition to the national government in Washington, D.C., there's a government in each state, so there are 50 state governments. Because of federalism, there are some powers that belong only to the federal government and some powers that belong to the state governments. One power of the federal government is to regulate trade between the states.
It's 15
Another
minutes.
power of the federal government is to declare war. States have power too. States have their own laws and their own police. States also generally run their own schools. Some powers are shared. For example, both the federal and state governments have the power to tax. So why does the United States have a system of federalism? Remember, Americans fought the Revolutionary War to gain independence from Britain. The 13 former colonies were now 13 independent states. States were concerned about losing power to other states. States were also concerned about losing their power to the national government. However, many Americans realized they needed a central government strong enough to unite the country. So on the one hand, state governments did not want a national government so strong that there would be tyranny, but a central government that was too weak could not unite the country.
That's me.
Federalism was a compromise. Federalism provided some power to the national government in Washington, D.C., and other powers belonged to each of the states.
Do you know what to
Because of federalism, there are both federal and state legal systems in the United States. That's why in the United States, there are both federal courts and state courts. If you'd like to discuss federalism or any other matter related to U.S. law, stop by the message.
Give me a huggy. Give me a huggy. Oh, no.
All right, sorry, I just changed venues there. All right, so there are some powers that are granted only to the federal government, and these are either enumerated or expressed, which means they are actually listed in the Constitution, or they are implied, meaning that they are not listed, but they are still powers that the federal government has. As we talked about, the writers of the Constitution knew there were things that the federal government would have to deal with that weren't around in the 1790s, 1780s, such as the internet, airplanes. They knew these different things would come about, so they still wanted to give them the powers to make laws and rules about those things. All right, and so it's the last power we saw there called the necessary and proper, which are it's implied, meaning that again they're not actually in the Constitution. It's called the necessary and proper clause. It's also called the elastic clause.
We seek students.
Giving power to Congress. Who doesn't love a little power? Unfortunately, power in the wrong hands can lead to some very, very bad things. Just ask Hitler or Mussolini or Sauron. So when our Constitution was written in our Union form, our founding fathers gave a lot of thought as to the power they would be giving to Congress, because no one wanted to wind up with a Mount Doom situation on their hands. There are two basic types of powers that were granted to Congress: enumerated and implied. Enumerated powers were those that were directly stated, while implied powers were more, well, implied. Like, not right on the nose, you know. Congress implied powers are stated in the necessary and proper clause of the Constitution, where it says that Congress has the power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or officer thereof. Phew, those boys did like their long sentences, didn't they? Essentially, they were giving Congress a bit of wiggle room. If there were certain laws they deemed necessary and proper in order to carry out their constitutional rights, well, they could enact them. It would be like if your parents had asked you to babysit your baby brother and they gave you the right to deny him dessert after dinner. While it wasn't implicitly stated, if your brother did reach for a slice of cake anyway, you might deem it necessary and proper to tie him to the couch with a bungee cord. Isn't wiggle room swell? Okay, those are the implied powers. What are enumerated powers? Well, you got it. Here's the short list of the rights Congress was given by the Constitution in Article 1, Section 8. They were granted permission to borrow money for the United States, create and collect taxes as long as those taxes are imposed equally from state to state, impose restrictions on commerce, establish a post office, declare war, maintain a navy and provide supplies for them, manage, train, and arm a militia, and identify and enforce crimes at sea. So, as you can see, they had their fingers in quite a few pies, which you could probably tell just by looking at most of them. Yeah, sorry guys, Jenny Craig. But despite all that power, Congress was not given complete control, thanks to Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution, which laid out a handful of...
Okay. All right, so just as there are powers given only to the federal government, there are powers that are reserved for the state governments, and these are the 10th Amendment. And any power not given to the national government is reserved for the states. These include things like marriages, licenses, driver's licenses, hunting. These are all reserved for the states. And again, that's by the 10th Amendment.
The Constitution doesn't really say whether states have the ability to pass laws to enforce immigration policies.
All right, right now we're going to talk about reserved powers. Professor Obasanjo, why don't you give us a definition of what reserved powers are?
Those powers which do not belong to the federal government, either enumerated or implied, are called reserved and therefore belongs to the states.
Okay, now, Professor Gaffney, I always refer to my students, I tell my students that we had states before we had a United States, and it always draws some strange looks from them. Explain to us their powers, given the definition Mr. Obasanjo just gave us.
Well, reserved powers remain extremely important to people who follow the intent of the original intent of the framers of the Constitution. So keep in mind, from the Articles of Confederation, where each state had supreme powers, we got federalism. So now certain powers are reserved for the states, and those are the ones that are not given to the federal government, as Professor Obasanjo said. For example, states have the ability to set their own drinking age, to set the speed limit, to issue licenses like marriage licenses, to decide family law, to decide state crimes. And I think this concept is especially interesting right now when we look at immigration policy.
All right, and the last type of powers we have are concurrent powers. So we have implied powers, which are not in the Constitution but are granted to the federal government, expressed or enumerated, which are in the Constitution, reserved, which are given directly to the states, and then concurrent powers, and these are powers that are shared by both levels of government: taxes, roads, court systems. Both, they share them, they both make laws about them.
I like to share, to show that I care. You are my friend, and I wanna be fair, fun when we share. And I'm learning now, and if you'd like, I could show you how. I'll share my toys, and we can play pretend. Our toys share too, because like us, they're friends. I share my super awesome dancers, they work better with two. And if you share yours with me, we've got something brand new. I'll give you my glove and you'll give me your bat. And when we're done, then we'll trade that. Sharing may seem hard, but we need to play. And you know we're on the right track. I like to share, to show that I care. You are my friend, and I wanna be fair, fun when we share. And you know that it's true, that I really like sharing with you. Yeah, I really like sharing with you.
All right, that's podcast 5.1, talking about federalism and the different powers. Enjoy your day off, and hopefully I'll see you tomorrow.